I think it is safe to say that core 5th edition combat rules can be a bit too repetitive and simple at times, especially for experienced players. There really aren't that many different and unique ways to swing a sword, cast fireball or grapple an enemy. While a particularly creative DM probably won't have a problem keeping fights fresh and interesting, there are a few readily available ways to spice up combat in any campaign and at any table. But before you overrun the like button, cleave through the subscribe and bell icon and massively damage the YouTube algorithm, let me remind you about TANARES RPG Kickstarter, which is currently steamrolling through its Kickstarter stretch goals. It is an elaborate and extensive third-party 5th edition supplement bundle made by Dragori Games. It's rich lore, 4 new classes, extra spells and other character customization options, an arena PvP system, an entire pre-made adventure accompanied by awesome miniatures, are all playable either within the TANARES setting itself or portable and usable in other D&D worlds. I've made 3 videos focusing specifically on these new classes, archetypes and spells. Check them out after you finish watching this video. Among other things, Chapter 9 of Dungeon Master's Guide provides a decent amount of so-called combat options, which are basically variant rules that add on to or change the standard combat flow. These are initiative variants, additional action options, hitting cover, cleaving through multiple enemies, sustaining serious injuries, getting shocked by massive damage, and finally, morale. Initiative variants are not something I've had a lot of experience with personally. Initiative is always a hot topic and many people have made up their own custom rules for it. While it can grind things to a halt and ruin the session flow, modern technology has significantly shortened the time needed to calculate and record everyone's turn order. But if I had to make a change to the core rule for whatever reason, I'd probably stick with the first variant, which is called Initiative Score. Now, on one hand, removing the emotional roller coaster that is the excitement of going first or the disappointment of going last is probably making combat even more bland and dull, but on the other hand, you can finally pick that assassin rogue and stop worrying about the random natural one shutting down your best subclass feature. Side initiative is not something I would personally recommend. One side getting bombarded with damage spells and whatnot is a recipe for super lopsided combat outcomes that are practically impossible to balance. It's basically a coin toss between adventurers winning way too easily and a total party kill on the other end. I'd maybe consider it in a truly massive fight with multiple sides all fighting against each other in a sort of like a battle royale fashion, but for anything else it's a hard no in my book. Speed factor is pretty much an oxymoron because it's anything but fast. On paper you may get the impression that it provides you with additional tactical considerations, but in practice this choice is false because a wizard will almost always cast spells while a fighter with a bow will almost always shoot arrows. Moreover, these bonuses and penalties are pretty much rendered irrelevant due to constant re-rolling that happens at the start of every round. This uncertainty may seem thrilling in theory, but it would easily turn a level 1 combat from a fun 10 to 20 minute change of pace into a 1 hour slog, if not even more. If you really want a deeper and more fun combat vibe, then action options variant are just what you need. If you get anything from this video, I truly hope it's these little additions to the otherwise slim set of standard action choices. Climb onto a bigger creature, disarm, overrun, shove aside and tumble all make the fights more tactical and provide additional opportunities to make combat part of the role-playing experience itself instead of just being a dice rolling simulator. The only option I'm not entirely sold on is Mark. It would make certain character concepts meaningfully more powerful by default because it would effectively give them multiple reactions per round instead of the, one standard one. Think about it, your basic Sorkadin build would be able to both get an attack of opportunity and cast counterspell during a single round. However, running along the Tarrasque's back, knocking the enemy's mage spellcasting focus away, and jumping over or sliding under an enemy are scratching that cinematic itch in me without breaking anything in a mechanical sense, really. Hitting cover is something I already use in my games and it makes perfect sense. I honestly think it should have been part of the core rule set and therefore I recommend it to every DM out there who hasn't tried it yet. Think about it, a creature in front of you is providing half cover, which is basically a +2 bonus to your armor class. Doesn't it make sense that similarly to your shield giving you +2 to AC, therefore occasionally catching projectiles or, blocking an enemy's attack, that arrow that is flying towards you has a chance to get stuck in the, creature that's providing cover to you in a similar fashion. It is a bit more mathy, yes, but once the DM memorizes all of the adventurer's AC values, values, calculating whether the attack roll hits the cover or not becomes very easy in my own experience. Cleaving through creatures is a bit more tricky to assess and implement. It increases the melee character's powers because they're able to deal more damage to multiple enemies at once. Ranged weapon users may feel left out and, less useful because they are effectively dealing less damage. However, this variant undeniably speeds up the slugfest that is fighting against a horde of enemies. The rule itself suggests that, it is only to be used if hordes are a regular occurrence, so for the most part you won't ever really need it. Now, injuries are more interesting in my opinion. However, the suggested triggers for lingering injuries are way too ambiguous and will result in DMs appearing overly antagonistic when or if they decide to use them. This is a prime example of a rule used as more of a guideline than an actual rule. Instead of arbitrarily deciding which critical hit, knockout, or a low death saving throw triggers an injury, the DM can instead use the table as a springboard of ideas for modifying the existing official monster stat blocks, especially against higher level adventuring parties whose power curve goes parabolic and who beat deadly encounters with ease. The DM can also spice up falling damage, lava pits, and various other environmental hazards, where instead of it being just an ordinary hit point drain, a little bit of damage, the adventurers risk breaking their legs, spines, becoming permanently scared or disfigured, and so on. It also makes the regenerate spell actually useful instead of being just a second fiddle to the overused instant healing spells. Think about it. Instead of the overpowered high-level adventuring party mocking the mighty pit fiend, they are actually cautious, maybe even genuinely afraid. After the first encounter with one of the Hell Barons left them with half of their limbs missing, dozens of wounds festering around the bite marks and scars from the burning hellfire, they are suddenly not so eager to duke it out and may prefer a little bit of that often ignored diplomacy magic. It would make the high challenge rating monsters an actual challenge instead of just glorified bags of hit points. If you're a DM gleefully listening to this, be mindful of your bloodlust. I wouldn't give every lowly minion this ability to maim and disfigure the adventurers, that easily. The adventurers are supposed to possess superhuman, supernatural powers and be able to deal with beings who can wipe us ordinary mortals with a flick of a finger. But I'd definitely add these or similar kinds of effects to boss level enemies and select milestone, story, and plot developing combat encounters just to amp up the intensity and keep the stakes high from time to time. That way the players may actually appreciate their victories even more and wear their scars and maimed body parts as a badge of honor. Massive damage is weird. Half of the system shock table shuts you down completely, while the other half destroys your action economy. Think of it this way, it is very common for a low-level character to lose half or more of its hit points in a single go. It is also far more likely for low-level characters to fail a DC 15 Constitution saving throw. So, if the DM uses this right away from level 1, playing a wizard or a sorcerer will leave no doubt in anyone's mind you are a certified masochist. So, it's really overly punitive to low-level characters and low challenge rating monsters, at the same time, as a random critical hit can tip the odds of victory way too much to one or another side. However, at some point during tier 2 character progression, between levels 5 and 11, this variant rule suddenly starts making sense. The incidence of losing half or more hit points from a single attack is less common, as multi-attack becomes way more prevalent across a wide range of monster stat blocks. So every now and then, you will be at risk of getting system shocked, but it won't be happening way too much like it happens on low levels. And then when you get to high levels and have, say, 100 hit points, the number of times you will take 50 damage or more in one go is probably in the single digits, unless your DM is really out for blood. But even if the DM is really trying to kill you, it's probably done via a flurry of attacks, all dealing 10 to 20 damage each, instead of one attack dealing 50 or more. On the flip side though, if the DM is simply throwing an ancient dragon at you, for example, an already dangerous encounter becomes uncomfortably close to a TPK territory. It kind of becomes lopsided again. I don't have an elegant way of polishing this mess, but awareness is the first step towards improvement, so I will leave it at that. Finally, morale is something I rely on all the time as a DM. I use it merely as a guideline instead of a hard and fast rule, but I do like the part that says I can decide to automatically fail the save. That's pretty much how I run most combat encounters. I just decide that the monsters are, they are attempting to flee. To me, fighting to the death rarely makes sense. If the adventurers run away and live to fight another day, why wouldn't their enemies want to do the same too, right? Be it a pack of wolves with a simple simple and primitive survival instincts, or a scheming supervillain playing 4D chess against the oblivious adventurers, this rule makes most of the monsters and enemies more interesting to fight against and ups the stakes of every combat encounter. Instead of winning and killing for the sake of victory and loot, this rule lends itself perfectly to scenarios where the adventurers are tasked with capturing the cult leaders alive, or maybe returning a stolen MacGuffin from a gang of super elusive thieves. In both examples, the opponents may look to murder the adventurers first because that seems to be easy and the best solution, but once they figure out, they, the enemies of the adventurers, are the ones in greater risk of dying, they will abandon the scene by any means necessary because they have more important goals in mind. I'm sure many of you still listening to this will have your own homebrew rules and variants. Feel free to post them in the comments below, but the general aim and purpose of these Mechanics Mondays videos is to stick as close to the source materials as possible, so I will end it here. Check out the sponsors TANARES RPG and Historica Arcanum on Kickstarter. Both are deep into their stretch goals, so if your wallet allows, grab some of those D&D goodies for yourself. Special shout out to all of my current patrons, thank you for your continued support. I'm finally going to release a new character build this week. I know, it's been a long while since the last one. Tasha updates are in the pipeline too, so next few weeks will be full of new content on top of these Mechanics Mondays videos. Keep an eye out on the channel, what else can I say? With everything said and done, MinMax Munchking out, talk to you soon.